Okay, so today I want to give a talk on sort of the history of the, we'll start out with its very first original name, the Xbox Media Player Project, or as it was called back then, the Yet Another Media Player Project, YAMP, I believe it was what it was called. The first of those, Xbox Media Player, was developed by two people, Duo and somebody else. No, Frodo was the other one. So YAMP was developed by Frodo. The other one was developed by Duo and one other guy whose name I'm suddenly blanking on. I didn't write it down. It's not very important to the conversation. Then a few years later, or a few months later, they realized that they were basically developing the same player, and they were both developing it open source, and they realized that it was pretty ridiculous to develop two separate players when the community of modded Xbox people was so small at that point that it didn't make any sense to work on two separate projects. So they put them together, and that's how XBMP was born. Now I want to give an overview of what what Kodi is. And so I made a video a couple days ago that's pretty ridiculous that I made for Google Summer of Code, which we applied for. But I figured, while it's pretty ridiculous, it might make a good way to start this talk. So here we go.
I think this is probably the best thing we've ever done. And what's this called?
This is called the Xbox Media Player.
Let's get a closer look.
It's really simple. All right, so here we have XBMC running on a Raspberry Pi.
You basically have your own DIY streaming console, which is the Xbox Media Center. If you haven't set up a media center before, it's time to check it out.
This is Kodi. In 2002, it started life as the Xbox Media Player. It's changed its name a few times since then, to Xbox Media Center, XBMC, and finally Kodi, but over the past 13 years, one thing has remained the same. Dedicated developers working hard to make one of the best media centers in the world better. Various versions of the software have been featured in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, thanks to users who started buying the Raspberry Pi and inevitably ended up installing Kodi on it. In fact, demand for the Pi from XBMC users so vastly outstrips supply that, well, I'll let Eben Upton, CEO of the Raspberry Pi company, explain it.
We did our first 300,000 units on the basis of rationing to one per customer. You know, when you ration to one per customer, you can't buy a class full of Pis.
When XBMC announced the port to Android, TechCrunch famously wrote, "There might finally be a reason to buy a Google TV." Sadly, while the Google TV never opened up enough or reached the critical mass necessary for Kodi to support it, the newer Android TV, thanks to its underlying Android architecture, should have no problem getting Kodi support. A skin that perfectly emulates the Android TV's lean-back design is even being developed as we speak. Kodi has been everywhere, including to Middle-earth, and it has received any number of awards. But we still need your help to take Kodi to the next level. We need to improve our server by enabling on-the-fly transcoding and transferring files from device to device, so you can easily take a movie with you when your tablet loses its internet connection. We need to improve support for profiles so you and your grandma don't have to fight over what to watch. We need to finally implement a web browser in Kodi. And finally, Kodi won the SourceForge Award for Best Project for Gamers back in 2008. Now, in 2015, we hope to finally live up to that award, but we need more developers to help make RetroPlayer a reality, and possibly to integrate NVIDIA's GameStream directly into Kodi, so that any Kodi box, whether the Raspberry Pi or the latest, greatest gaming PC, can play the best games around. Google Summer of Code students, we have a vision, but we need your help to make it happen. Let's get coding. Oh. All right, so that was that. The second half of it wasn't super important for you guys because it was all about things we're kind of interested in Google Summer of Code people working on. But that's kind of a little look at what Kodi looks like. I guess now, since we've skipped this because I didn't think about it ahead of time, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Nathan Betzen. Here's my email address and my Twitter account. Please don't email me any horrible things or sign me up for anything, but, there it is. I've been a user since 2007. I installed it on the original Xbox in a country where that was legal. I joined the team in 2009 as a forum moderator. I wrote my first blog post in July 2009. At that time, we didn't really have an add-on system. We had scripts and we had plugins, and those sort of worked, but the only sort of add-on system we had at the time was this one developer had his own little area where he was maintaining a repository, and you could add that repository, but it didn't come built in, and it was quite a hassle to put together. So I gave a little blog post on how to do that. I called it "Keep It Simple, Stupid" because at the time I really liked that phrase. I became the community manager in August of 2010, a project manager in March 2011. There are actually like 4 of us, though honestly, the only one of us really does the really hardcore project management stuff, and he's not here because he's busy probably doing hardcore project management stuff. I joined the board in the XBMC Foundation board in 2012, and I became the president last month. The conversation for that was, hey, what do you guys think about me being the president? All right, that's fine. Cool. Well, obviously, we don't really consider the roles of the board very important. What is Kodi? Once again, sorry, could I get a show of hands? How many people, let's do it the reverse. How many people aren't familiar with Kodi? All right, I'll do it for you guys. Kodi is a software media player and entertainment hub. What that means basically, if you're familiar with something like VLC, VLC is a desktop player. You sit at the desk with a mouse. You look for whatever video file you want to play, and you open it with VLC. Kodi is sort of along that same line. We both use a base of something called FFmpeg, which is what allows us to do all the decoding that we do, at least on the software side. But where VLC is for the desktop, Kodi is for the living room and the couch and sometimes your tablet. The idea is we provide well, it's not there, but we provide a 10-foot interface. The whole idea of this interface, and actually I'll show it to you. The whole idea of this interface is that you shouldn't have to sit at a desk or use a mouse to interact with your media. Instead, you should be able to sit at your couch and just enjoy it like you do with any other 10-foot interface. Back when this was developed around 2003, the entire concept was pretty unheard of, frankly. It just didn't exist. Windows Media Center, I think was one of the only examples. There were a couple others, but they weren't very well picked up at the time. Myth TV already existed. And actually, it's worth pointing out, both Myth TV and Windows Media Center were both centered around the old experience of watching actual TV and not recording the TV, not indexing TV in any way. It was really centered around simply watching TV the way we've all done it. So this idea of creating an actual place where you can simply browse through all of your catalog was fairly new. The other thing that was new at the time was the concept of being able to watch an entire series of a show all at once. These days people call it, doing the Netflix thing. But back in 2003, Netflix didn't exist except as a DVD rental company. So once again, you're dealing with something that just didn't exist back then. Binge watching, yeah. So that's kind of the idea of Kodi. The goal is to be able to directly navigate to whatever content that you have, to watch as much or as little of it as you want, and not to be constrained by, whether it's on TV right now. Though, there is actually an add-on for Kodi called Pseudo TV that somewhat attempts to emulate that watching TV experience. It takes all of the content that you have, turns it into a TV programming guide,
And then you can start watching an episode of whatever, let's say Seinfeld, and then the next show to come on could be anything from NBC or anything that's a comedy. It's a pretty cool little add-on, but I don't have it here, and I'm not going to show it off because it's not really the point of this talk. Kodi is free and open source. It's GPL2, available on every popular platform, and of course supports every content and media retrieval method, local, network, and internet, which means it works with your local data. It works with online content providers like YouTube. The one thing it doesn't do very well is DRM, which means that while YouTube is supported, Netflix isn't, because one of them doesn't really like open source content providers. How is Kodi different? I actually covered a lot of this already. It's a unified interface, so you can look at pictures, videos, and music, along with applications and games, as we're working towards. It pioneered the 10-foot interface. This next one I'll get into a little bit more later, but it's the same code base on all platforms. If you're familiar with other media centers out there or other video players out there, one very important trait amongst all of them is that they're completely different on every platform. If you watch, for example, Netflix on the Xbox 360, you're not going to have anywhere near the same experience as Netflix on the iPad tablet or on your computer. It's all completely different, and you kind of have to relearn how to use the system. With Kodi, it's just not a thing. Every system works the same, behaves the same, and looks the same. It's fully skinnable. As you saw in that video, it's sort of ridiculous how skilled our skinners are. There's the standard default skin that you guys all saw, but the whole thing can be transformed in a matter of weeks into something that looks exactly like Google's leanback on the Google TV, or Android TV, excuse me, or literally any other media center out there you can think of. We'll skip all this. So here's where I want to start the conversation today. May 21st, 2008. In Kansas, as you can see, it was raining slightly. It was 75 degrees. I remembered that, obviously. I didn't look it up. And there was a blog post put out by what was then a team called XBMC, called Exodus. And the point of the blog post was this. This group of people had been working on the port for XBMC for Mac. And there had been a lot of uncomfortable discussions that were going on at the time. The team that was working on the Linux port and the team that were working on the Mac port weren't seeing eye to eye. They were having a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of issues. They were using different revision control systems. The Linux people were using SVN. The Mac people were using GitHub at the time. The GitHub side people were doing a closed development cycle, which it was GPL, but the rules of GPL are that you can keep your source closed all the way up until the point of release, at which point you have to open it. The Linux people were doing open development, which meant anyone could see the code as the code was being added, not as release was happening. There were platform-specific changes. The people working on the Mac port were adding a lot of things that were Mac only. And we'll get back to that, but they were adding a lot of Mac-only things that weren't available on Linux or weren't part of Linux. And finally, there was a platform-specific rebranding going on. As I mentioned, it was called OS XBMC. And this obviously bothered the Linux people. So the Mac people left. They created what ultimately became Plex, and the Linux people stayed, and they created what ultimately became known as Kodi. And during this time, the Linux people realized that there was some change that were going to need to happen. And the reason these changes needed to happen was because they'd never dealt with this before. Let's go back in time. 2002, Xbox Media Player was released. 2004, XBMC was released. all on the Xbox, by the way. 2006, XBMC 2.0 was released. And only at 2007, in May, was the initial port for Linux up and running. And it wasn't even announced, as far as I'm aware, to the general public until about September. Which means that for roughly 5 years, this team has never had to deal with releasing for any platform other than one. And suddenly they had to deal with this whole new area where you were going to have developers who were in charge of one category only, developers who were in charge of one other category only, and how were these developers going to communicate and actually make sure things work together. And so, at the same time as the whole OS XBMP thing was going down, the team decided there needed to be a set of rules. And so they created 5 guidelines. These guidelines I actually copied directly from the forum post back in 2008. So they're not really up to date, but I wanted to give you an idea of literally exactly what they were thinking back then. The first guideline is that all source code should be committed to SVN on SourceForge before any public binaries are released. Very simply, that means open development. This project, at least, was going to be an open development project that anyone could see at any time, even well before we released anything. All source code should strive to be platform agnostic. Any platform-specific features should be discussed with other developers, preferably on IRC or in a private team forum. You remember how I said Kodi on a tablet is exactly the same thing as Kodi on your HTPC, is exactly the same thing as Kodi on your Raspberry Pi? That point is the entire reason why. We decided way back then that this has to look exactly the same because we want our users to know exactly how to use it everywhere. Number 3, major new features should be developed in a separate branch or committed in small increments. That's just good coding. Nothing really exciting there. If you need any new tools for development, project management, whatever, or have found a better way to work with the code, then let everyone on the team know so that we can all benefit. This point might be the one that ultimately caused the break between the two groups, because when the Mac developers first started developing, they didn't have the ability to push to SVN. And by the way, just FYI, we've moved to Git, so don't think we're ridiculous still. They didn't have the ability to push to SVN, and so rather than communicate that problem, or rather than having all the groups discuss how to resolve it, all they did was just go on to GitHub, because GitHub was easy and everyone was used to it from that team. And that's fine, but because that was the way it was, it made it very difficult for the two groups to match up their code at any point, frankly. And so the Linux port went a certain way, the Mac port went a different way, and they only started to merge every once in a while when code was released. And finally, XBMC is named XBMC, or XBMC4 platform. It's not called the Xbox Media Center. This, by the way, was when we changed our name, or anything else, so don't make up new names. Well, we violated that one by calling it Kodi now, but whatever. The rule still stands. Instead of XBMC for platform, it's Kodi for whatever. It's Kodi for the Mac, or Kodi for Linux, or Kodi for the Raspberry Pi. That's always the rule. And that set of guidelines, it's kind of amazing how ingrained that set of guidelines is. Back then, the actual forum post that I copied this from was a forum post in which an individual named Scott Davila was being invited to the team. And the rest of the team said to the guy who does the job of inviting, they said, make sure to tell him about these rules that we put together just now. That never happens anymore. We all just sort of, I don't know, if you get invited to the team, you've been working with the team long enough to know this is just how we do it. So I think there's a really good chance that none of the rest of the team members, other than historians like myself, know that these actual rules exist, because we don't write them down anywhere, we just work with them. But now let's look at another thing that happened. Around the same time, this is June 2008, a company called Boxy appeared. And Boxy is, or was, a for-profit company that was working on, in June 2008, making XBMC a platform that was social in nature. Obviously, they pivoted a couple times. Wait, first, how many people know what Boxy is? Okay, good, I don't have to explain that. Except for maybe to you. Boxy is, it was a port of XBMC that gradually went on to do its own thing. They created the Boxy Box, which was one of the first set-top boxes that used the XBMC software. Then they went on to make some other closed-source thing, and then they got bought out. But early on, Boxy had appeared, and they had all of this money, and the team was worried that they weren't going to be able to maintain independence because Boxy had all the money, and the foundation didn't exist. There was a team XBMC at the time, and they didn't know, I mean, were they all just going to become unpaid Boxy employees, or what was going to happen? And so Boxy worked out an agreement with sort of the leadership of the project at the time to help create something called the XBMC Foundation. And in December 2009, the foundation was officially created. The point of the foundation was pretty simple. The foundation would always maintain independence. It was organized as a nonprofit, so whoever was a member could never actually make any money from it other than maybe working as an employee or your contractor or something. But they didn't have any other power to make any money. So these two things happened. This set of rules was created. The foundation was created, and then two really crazy things happened. I'll talk about each of them in relation to those things here as we go on. First, ARM became a thing. ARM became a thing. In October 2009, a team member named McGahee with a Beagle board demonstrated XBMC working on OpenGLES 2.0. Then January 2011, XBMC for iOS was released. If you paid attention to the Google Analytics for our website that day, every day before that we'd been averaging somewhere between 20 and 30,000 visitors, and on that day we had 120,000. It was quite a day. So it was released for iOS, and it was made possible because we had figured out how to port to OpenGL. The main developer for that iOS port was an individual, once again, the guy who was invited way back in 2008, Scott Davila, who learned, basically taught himself or figured out how to port not just cross-platform but cross-chip at the same time. So he could compile using either OS X or Linux a device for iOS. Oh, actually, sorry, I took a step too far. He started out compiling for iOS on Mac. And Mac and iOS actually have most of the same code base, so it was relatively easy to compile in terms of the OS, but he had to compile for ARM. The next step, though, in July of 2012, XBMC for Android was released, and then you had to compile both across OS and across chipset. So pretty much all the compiling happened on Linux and on Mac, on x86 devices, across platform and across chip to Android ARM devices. And it was quite a crazy feat. In January 2013, XBMC 12 was released without hardware video decoding. And we'll get back to that in a second. And in May 2014, XBMC 13 was released, finally bringing Android to parity with all the rest of the platforms by bringing hardware video decoding into the mix. So that's XBMC for ARM. But let's go back. So we had these team guidelines. How did those team guidelines affect this entire port to ARM? Well, first off, all the code was committed to public binaries. The only situation where this didn't happen was the iOS port, when Scott Davila himself, by himself, wrote almost all of the source code to make that transition. once he released it and he told the group, it was a matter of weeks before we announced it to everyone else. And those weeks were primarily spent working on making sure that everyone that we wanted to know, namely Gizmodo and Lifehacker and those people, were ready to blast the whole world with this information so that we could get 120,000 visitors in one day and crash our server. It's pretty great. All the source code should be platform agnostic. This was ridiculously difficult to do in 2011, 2012. The XBMC for iOS, and specifically XBMC for the Apple TV 2, was a feat of engineering beyond anything anyone had ever done before. XBMC at that time was still based on old Xbox code to some extent. It had been ported to OpenGL, but it was still very heavy. It was a very unpleasant program to run on anything that wasn't sort of a monster in 2010. And so the fact that you could get it to run at all on the Apple TV was nothing short of amazing. A lot of stuff was done at that time to make the code work better. The way we view libraries was changed. The way we literally with Kodi, of course. And the reason we did it was not because we liked the name, but because we liked the idea that was symbolized in the lettering. Kodi, if you look at it with the right font, not this one, actually looks like a fast forward button, or a skip forward button, a stop button, a play button, and a skip backward and a skip forward button. We liked the name because it was what we did. It was our remote control. It was everything that our foundation represented, the greatest media center in the world, in our opinion. And so we went with it, and we started filing the paperwork. That also took a lot of time. We had to put together an agreement with the company saying this is our new name. These are the things we get to keep from the old name. For example, it's still called the XBMC Foundation. And roughly a year passed. It went from October of that year to August of the next year. And at that time, we had filed all the paperwork, which was the really important big part. We'd registered all of the domain names that we needed. And we finally let the world know that we were changing our name to Kodi. And the world went apoplectic. It was crazy. I don't think we had nearly as many views as the Apple TV release, but we did have something like 800 comments under the blog post. And that's, just for reference, a typical blog post gets about 30. So 800 was a lot. And they were basically all negative. And we didn't know what we should do about that. We didn't know how to make the user community happy with the situation. So once again, the simplest thing we figured we could do was just ask the community, how can we make you happy with the situation? We're lawyered up. We have to stick to this name. The paperwork is filed. What can we do to make the community that ultimately was probably going to provide us with more developers over time happy with what we were doing? And the solution came out. What if the community was just the group that ultimately figured out what the logo of this thing was? And that kind of worked. The community created just hundreds of different logos, and they were incredible, all of them. We actually ended up adding a couple team members based purely on their art ability, because it was amazing what these people were doing. And so out of that, we got this logo right here, which we liked very much, and which on that video I showed you earlier, you saw at the very beginning there was a spinning X that turned into a K. That was created by yet another community member, because it's the amazing thing about that rule number 4 and about open source in general is that you just have to trust the community when they want to help you, and they will. It's just the most astonishing thing in the world. They came up, they said, we want to help, and they did, and they provided us these incredible things, and suddenly, once we released this new logo, everyone was cool again. And it went from Kodi is the worst thing I've ever heard to, all right, I'm okay now. In like a day. It was absurd. So those are the two stories I want to tell you kind of about our past. Now I want to talk a little bit about the future if I have time. Yeah, I have a little time, about 10 minutes, and we have to open to questions, I think. So this is the stuff we're excited about for the future. We're working on binary add-ons, which should allow a lot of neat new things. People being able to actually write applications that run directly from the Kodi interface. Media importing, VFS add-onifying, and content integration into a single library is this sort of big, crazy way of saying we're trying to create a mesh network where if you're familiar with most media companies out there these days, like the Netflix of the world, or if you're familiar with Plex, they all operate on the same concept. You start out with a server, which is where all your media is, and then every other box that you have is a client. That's great for them. We think that's a fine idea. But as you know, as I've already mentioned, every version of Kodi needs to be the same, at least just because we feel that's how it should be. And so if every version of Kodi is the same, why couldn't we just make every version of Kodi a server and every version of Kodi a client? And that's what this idea is. So let's say for a second that you have on your tablet some movies that you want to watch with your friends. You could take that tablet with that client, with that version of Kodi in those movies to your friend's house and simply integrate the thing into their network. It would immediately show up on their Kodi machines as a UPnP device, and it would immediately get imported. It would stay on your tablet. We haven't necessarily worked a way to transfer files between machines yet, but the idea is that that tablet then would become a server, just like everything else could become a server. So we're really kind of pumped about that concept, and it's very much in the early stages. Right, Kodi server. The next thing we're pumped about is Retro Player. This guy over here. It's the idea is that Kodi's a media player, right? A media center, a place where you can play your media. And up until fairly recently, everyone defined media as movies, music, home movies, and pictures. But we're missing an entire category of media called video games out of that, which is ridiculous. So we decided we wanted to try to make video games a reality. And we're going to try to do that in two different ways. First of all, there's a group that makes something called RetroArch, which is a cross-compatible library that plays binary executable emulators. And why that's so interesting to us is because that's essentially what FFmpeg does. It's basically the same idea. You don't have to know what kind of video file you have to have Kodi play it. In the same way, you shouldn't really need to know what kind of game that you have in order for Kodi to play it. You should just be able to throw anything on there and it should just work. So that's sort of the idea. We didn't, I didn't bring it. We actually have a pretty cool little device called a Retrode, which lets you plug in any cartridge to it, and it's got a bunch of different slots for that. And it'll let you play them on your computer. In the past, you've had to download whatever emulator works with that cartridge, but that's ridiculous. Why not just have it all in one? And that's the idea behind Retro Player. The other just fun caveat about Retro Player is that it's based off of Kodi, and the way emulators work is they take the game, they create an image, and then you get a bunch of images all in a row, and that's the game. So our developer here thought, well, you know what? If it's just a bunch of images, we could just record all those images and play them back, right? And so now, in Retro Player, at least with older emulators, you can actually rewind video games. So if you're playing Super Mario World and you die, you just rewind a couple seconds and you continue playing. It's fantastic. At a developers conference 2 years ago, there was a kid there. We had a meetup with users. A kid was there playing Super Mario World for like half an hour, and the whole time he just died and died and died and rewinded and rewinded and rewinded, and he got through like 2 levels because he's terrible at Super Mario World. But it was really funny to watch. It was a really amazing thing to see. And finally, audio DSP processing. Kodi's well known as a pretty good video player and also well known as a pretty terrible music player. This is a step to finally correct that. We've got a lot of people on the team now who are really big into audio, and we figured since everyone likes audio, we may as well make it work. And that brings us to all of you guys. And, you know, hopefully anyone else who, if we ever put this on YouTube or something. We need more people. The biggest problem we have right now is that there's only 1 or 2 people in charge of a whole lot of different things. For example, a single guy is the primary and mostly only lead in charge of the Mac port and the iOS port. It's just one guy who's doing this in his spare time. In a similar way, there's really only one guy in charge of the Android port. There are a lot of people that can compile Android, but only one guy's actually doing the work to making sure that video and hardware decoding on Android's working. We also need so we're down to one representative for a bunch of different things, because even with 50 or 60 developers and team members, it's just such a massive project. I mean, when your goal every day is to be able to work on, you know, every device imaginable and across every version of Linux and every version of Windows and Mac and Android, it gets to be, you just need more people. And so, you know, I'm looking at you guys. It would be really great to get those people. But that's not really all. We don't just need developers. We need skinners, people familiar with Python, people familiar with XML, documentation writers, if you just like Kodi but don't know how else to contribute, and even front-end and back-end web developers, because we have one of those guys too, because most of our people are really good at working in C++ and really terrible at designing a web page. Oh yeah, that last point is actually okay. I covered that already. So that's sort of the idea. We have a lot of people working with this project, but we could really use a lot more. And I think that's it. So I think I timed that almost perfectly. Not quite, but whatever. So I guess if you want, we can throw it open to questions. Yeah. It's definitely not a strategic direction, but there's no reason not to implement that kind of thing. I mean, the goal is always to be able to be used on as much media as possible. Are you aware of any? Are you familiar with the library system, or what libs we have that we might need? Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah, so long as there's open development along that area, I'm trying to think which developer might be interested in doing it. And frankly, one of the issues that we have right now is we don't have a ton of developers working in pictures. There are a couple of things that we've done in the past that have ultimately languished because the people who were interested then sort of wandered off. It's open source 101. You have people that do that. I think the picture category is very much along that road. Another one, just a similar concept. We had a really excellently working version of karaoke for a really long time, and it's gone. I think the code's still there, but I don't think anyone's developed it in 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. We were talking about pictures the other day. Do you know of any people working on that? Not openly. What's that? Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, we don't know of anybody, but that's actually it's a good feature request. I don't know if you're registered on the forum, but if you are, you should probably bring it up. Yeah, people would probably key in on that. There are a lot of people in there that are big photo people. Yeah. On Kodi, you mean? It's anything. It's literally since it works as its own server and its own client. It's all just one application. It can work on literally, well, maybe not literally, but almost every box you can think of. So, like, if you have a Raspberry Pi, it can run on that. If you have just a regular Ubuntu box, it can run on that. If you have I don't know. I mean, the list is pretty endless. I guess I don't know if this is part of your question, but the one thing, if you have like a Raspberry Pi, it obviously doesn't have a lot of storage capability. So you can do a couple different things to combat that. As I mentioned in some slide somewhere, it can play back local files, which means files that are actually on that computer. With a Pi, you would plug in an external hard drive probably. It can play shared folders over the network files. So it supports NFS, Samba, FTP, UPnP, and just about every other protocol that lets you share folders within a network. I think it even supports Apple file sharing, but probably not very well, and definitely not DRM. But any way that you can share amongst computers is a way that Kodi can actually get that media. And that's how most people use it. Most people have one box that has probably a Samba share on it, and everything else grabs from that box. I think, oh, yeah. What's that? Yeah, that's the whole point. So, like, you can, yeah, if you go up to our booth, we're booth 1, because we're the best. We have a whole range of different things you can put it on. This year, we're kind of jazzed about the Android Fire TV stick, just because it's so small. And all you do is you plug it into the TV, you plug the USB port into the TV's USB port, and that's all. Then you look for the shared files on the network, and you're done. It turns a dumb TV into a smart TV. It's pretty cool. So guy back there had his hand, then you. Probably not. There's been talk about doing something like that in the past, but I'm guessing, we're a nonprofit, so there's not like financial reason to do that really, beyond it would be cool to hire developers and stuff like that. I say probably not, and I mean for now we'll stick with that. But the one exception potentially is we've ever since the Raspberry Pi came out, we've kind of talked about offering some version, like some actual Raspberry Pi in a box with XBMC or now Kodi already installed, and it's possible we'll do that at some point. We don't really like to compete with other hardware providers because it's just, that's not what we do. We're software people. But the idea of releasing a version that we actually make of the Raspberry Pi 2, it's got to be the 2, because let's be frank right now, the Raspberry Pi 1 was really slow with Kodi. But the Raspberry Pi 2 works really well with it. It's also run by a nonprofit organization. A lot of what we do matches up. So if we ever do go hardware, release some sort of like limited edition hardware or something like that, that's probably the way we'd go. But that's a very big if at the beginning of that sentence. Okay.
My question is there any plan to
Yes. Whether that happens, there's been a plan to add a browser since 2009.
The reason why I'm asking is because I just got myself a Pi and I installed it, and so far I love it. My only problem is that I watch a lot of online content, like channels
Yeah.
overseas, and that's the only feature I don't have. And I tried like a few add-ons for video add-ons, and sometimes they work, some others just stop working.
Sure.
One of them was I think it was Xstream or something like that, so you can go to like Ustream or all those sites.
Oh.
Watch online content.
Yeah. Well, okay, first off, if they're not add-ons in our repo, we don't support them. And sometimes we think they're evil and bad. But to the bigger question, there's been talk a lot of times about how we integrate a web, some kind of client onto our system. And I think the big sticking point has always been there are a lot of open source clients out there that we could use, and it would be pretty easy to just launch it. Firefox would be easy. What's the base of Chrome again? WebKit. And there are a couple others. One of our developers, Tobias, was just talking about this while we were getting ready for Google Summer of Code. The issue is that we've, the whole point of using Kodi to begin with is as a 10-foot interface. So it's really hard to come up with a really good way to integrate a regular web client into a system where you're supposed to be able to just use a remote control to control it. So I think work is being done on that regard, and I think we're going to probably try to make a push to make that a reality this summer. But at the end of the day, it's always going to come down to, can we control this with a remote control? And if we can, then awesome. And if we can't, then we're going to have to think long and hard about whether we actually include it. Okay, who's next? Yep.
Can you tell me about the server a little bit more, or the server aspect?
Yeah, like the things coming up or what already exists?
I know nothing about it. So my background is with TV and like using it for a front end and a back end.
Sure.
And I know Kodi or XBMC can interact with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just wanting to know more.
Sure. Well, I guess let's start just with a quick aside about Myth TV. We're big fans, mostly not so much with the interface, because let's be honest, the Myth TV interface takes a little while to get working. But the actual PVR side of Myth TV works great. It's pretty awesome, and it has commercial flags, which are the best thing on the planet. So we have a back-end system. Specifically, we have add-ons that let us interact with other PVR's software out there. Myth TV is a big one. TV Headend, Media Portal, VDR, and other ones. So we really like PVR aspects of those. But going back to the question, the idea of the server. The way we're going about that, the way of the future, we think, is using a combination of basically JSON and UPnP. What each client would do would be to look for a UPnP server on the network, which already has the list of libraries. It would import that list of libraries from UPnP directly into its own library after asking, can I import this? And then using JSON, once you watch a show, it would communicate back and forth saying how far in the show you are, when you hit stop, whether you're finished. You would mark it as done on every device connected within the mesh, and so on and so forth. There's actually, to some extent, there's working code. This past DevCon, we actually saw a pretty cool implementation of this, but there are a lot of little niggles that you have to work through to get that really ready for users. And there are a lot of questions still left unresolved at this point, as I understand it. The guy working on it is Sasha Montaleza, who we all call Montalese because we're Americans and we don't know how to pronounce European names. And he's brilliant. That guy is the smartest person I know, other than like 25 other guys I know. And he did, like a year or two ago, there's a joke that we have about him. If you find the most boring thing you can find that's really important, you need to go up to him and say, "We think that this can't be done," and then you just wait a couple weeks, and that handles that. He's pretty great. So I'm very convinced that that'll get done in the next year or two, and that's how it'll work. That's the idea. There'll be this mesh that'll all the devices will be able to talk to each other. Who's next? Yeah. Oh yeah, I haven't tried it since 2009 or 11 or something. But if you have a karaoke file, which is CD plus G, I think is the file. I don't know, something like that. Then if you load it up, it'll actually provide the lyrics. It'll play the music, and if you have an audio in with a microphone, you can sing right along. Maybe, assuming it still works. How are we doing? All right, we have about 5 minutes left. Any more questions? Yeah.
Do you have any plans to bring back the 32-bit build on XBMC?
I don't think so. I think with this most recent release, we got rid of it, right? I think that might be the end of it then. Usually, if we drop something, we don't typically bring it back in. There are a lot of times, though, there are groups who like it enough that they bring it back on their own. So, I mean, for example, the big ones right now are XBMC for Xbox still exists, ridiculously enough, and it actually works really well, ridiculously enough. The Broadcom Crystal HD card, which was what you used for the Apple TV 1, we dropped support for it with 14, but Sam Nazarko, who develops Crystal Ubuntu in England and everywhere, I guess, he's actually got support for it on his version of Kodi called OSMC, something like that. You can look up Crystal Ubuntu and it would be there. So I don't think we're going to bring back a 32-bit version of Kodi Ubuntu, but there's no reason it couldn't be done. I mean, it's just using older libraries, so you just do a build with those older libraries. Find somebody who's pretty good at building Ubuntu, and you're all set. Anybody next? Yep.
Going back to like the server, the front end, back end, like with the TV. I'm a long-term the TV user, and that's because I love Kodi for the interface, but I needed more. And
Yeah.
So it's more of a question for your community, and I'm glad you guys embrace the community. But how do you handle plugins with like developers dropping in and off? Because that's kind of one of the issues I noticed.
Boy, it's a tough issue. I mean, we just had to deal with that pretty majorly with our YouTube add-on. Here, I'll show you actually. With our YouTube add-on at the moment, you can see there's this thing for my subscriptions and sign in and sign out. For the longest time, the way our YouTube add-on worked was it just pretended it was the website, which you can do with Python. And so you'd put in your username and you'd log in. Well, YouTube fixed it so we couldn't do that anymore. And we weren't sure what to do. And then, so basically YouTube didn't work as a login. You couldn't look at your own subscriptions for a very long time. Until a new developer, whose name is Bromix, fixed it. YouTube has this whole system these days where you go to youtube.com/activate, you put in a code, and you authorize this device to work with the YouTube add-on system. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is, because our community is big enough, we don't have to advertise this is a problem. We just sort of wait until it just sucks bad enough that somebody appears and is like, I guess I'll fix this because nobody else is. And it's a really nice thing to be able to do that a lot of the time. With that said, there are still things where if we become dependent on them enough, and there's not a community member creating the add-on or developing the add-on, a lot of times we'll just have a team member just start picking up the work. The big guys in our team that are doing that these days are Ronnie, Ruck over here, whose real name is Rick, by the way. Very tricky change to Ruck. And a couple other guys out of Europe, the Big Noid, I forget who else, other people. So it's kind of that double layer system. If we think it's important enough, the internal team members who are in charge of actually maintaining the repo start fixing it themselves. And if we don't think it's important enough, or if we think it's just barely good enough, then we wait for somebody in the community to do it. Anybody else? Yeah.
Is there any upcoming platforms you guys are porting to right now?
No, I don't think so. The Raspberry Pi 2 came out, and we were pumped, and that was ported in about 32, no, not even 32, like 16 hours. It was pretty great. I think I'm not aware of anything. I'm not aware of, really, frankly, of very many additional platforms that are open. I guess the one people are sort of looking at the moment is the Xbox One, only because if what they're saying about Windows 10 is true, and if it works on Windows 10, it should work on the Xbox One, then I guess we might support that again, which would be the world's craziest thing and just the most ridiculous thing ever. The fact that we had an application that ran illegally on the original Xbox for like 7 years, and now it's suddenly running legally on the new Xbox. It would be ridiculous. It would make me very sad that we had to change our name, because XBMC for the Xbox would be quite the description. But it kind of depends on whether Windows 10 does what they say it's going to do.
Well, you know, I've been kind of hoping that you guys would be like on smart TVs.
Oh.
But I'm guessing Samsung has a very bad software policy.
Yeah.
Let you do whatever you want on there.
Yeah, it's pretty closed. We're not. I don't think anybody's opposed to running on smart TVs. The problem has in the past been that smart TVs work only on HTML5, which absolutely wouldn't work for us. We're based on C code and Python and things like that. So porting to HTML5 is essentially impossible. We'd have to do a thin client, which is how groups like Plex do it.
Well, this is my excuse for using Plex then.
Yeah, fair enough. Fire TV stick, by the way. Don't need smart TV anymore. But
becoming obsolete by this point.
yeah, it's rapidly. And that's the crazy thing about smart TVs, right? They're really cool until they're not cool, like 6 months later. But
they've kind of aged on the model too. Like if you have a Samsung smart TV from 2013,
yeah,
that's old technology in 2015.
Yeah, and frankly, it was probably old technology in 2013, because the chipsets they use in smart TVs are the cheapest chipsets they can find that will run the software they want to run.
Barely capable.
Yeah, barely capable. I think that there's probably a chance that over the next few years, smart TVs are going to switch to ARM, and they're going to switch to, version 7 or whatever, the things that we run on. And that's actually, I don't even know why I'm saying this, because it's already happening. I know that the Android TV's platform, there are a couple TV systems that run that platform. They don't run their own HTML5 thing anymore. They actually run Android TV. And now that that's possible, and because we run on Android, there's literally no reason why we can't run on those TVs. So in those select circumstances, then very definitely we can run on those platforms. But that's the thing. We'd have to have something that can support OpenGLS 2.0, and if we don't have that, then we can't run on it. Anybody? They were, and I have no idea what happened with that. It's really weird. Like that group, yeah. The Samsung. Okay, so after Boxy got done with the Boxy TV and once again threw away their community, which let me tell you, that was something. They created a new Boxy device called the Boxy. It might have been okay. So the first device was the Boxy Box, and the next one was Boxy TV, which did very poorly because it required you to have an internet connection that could record whatever you were watching on the TV to a cloud recorder somewhere, which works in Kansas City, which didn't have Google Fiber at the time. Chattanooga, Tennessee, which has gigabit, and that's all. Maybe some Verizon areas in the Northeast. Everywhere else, it's incredibly difficult to get gigabit internet, and so recording and then streaming to the network it's just so difficult right now. It's certainly not real time, and so boxy TV didn't work very well and didn't pick up anywhere. And it doubly didn't work very well because it was being sold at Walmart, which, no offense to the fine shoppers at Walmart, they probably don't really understand what the cloud is in the first place. So how are they going to know how to record to the cloud? So they got bought out by Samsung, and that's the last I heard of them. I don't know. From that point on, I don't know anything about what happened to those guys. There were a couple team members originally from XBMC that were still with them when they got bought out, but we haven't. I don't know. I don't think anyone's talked to them since then, so I don't know. Oh, and we're 5 minutes over. So thanks for coming, guys. This has been fun.